Me okay?
You're coming in loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Thanks for everybody for joining today. Tracy McMullen's also going to join in, and we're going to walk through some slides. I'm going to share my presentation over here, and we're going to run through some slides, and hopefully we'll get to demo a couple things. And again, I appreciate everybody taking time today. The video that we just saw was from kind of our whole Anschutz campus. We're coming to you today from Denver, Colorado. And our children's hospital is on the University of Colorado Anschutz campus. And we certainly work collaboratively across the university, the adult hospital, and our children's hospital to deliver the best care possible to Colorado and the 7-state region. So for those, some people have maybe heard me before at K-Scope and whatnot, but I'll just really quickly introduce myself. Again, I'm Bill Mall. I work at Children's Hospital Colorado. I've been there for about 6 years now, and we are doing a lot in the space of finance and building out really good financial tools to get our arms around how we're performing in the past and then how we're going to respond today, certainly moving forward. So quick slide about Children's Hospital Colorado. We are quite large and continue to grow within the Denver metro area, and have recently just opened another hospital on the north side of Denver, right actually in the middle of our COVID response. So so it's been there, it's been opening slowly. Obviously volumes have been down quite a bit, and but we'll continue to move forward. So today's topics, I want to go through basically 3 tools for how we responded to COVID-19 and go into some details about that. So today we've been using ePBCS, which I know has been rebranded a little bit by Oracle, but that helps us do our forecasting process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation. But I also want to talk about quite a bit of innovation that we've been pushed to do within our Essbase environment. We'll talk about just cubes on the fly and some of the tools that we maybe were a little bit more, I'd say, hesitant to use, but maybe we just haven't prioritized to actually use them, that in the fast way we had to respond, that kind of forced a lot of innovation for us to create new analytics, new ways to view data very, very quickly. And then we'll talk about some of the data visualization tools that are out there and how we've leveraged that somewhat, and kind of, again, in this crisis, kind of move forward with a lot of innovation that's been helpful to our organization. So forecast planning on the cloud. I'm going to turn over to Tracy for just a quick introduction for those who don't know about planning on the cloud, and then we'll kind of get into the specifics for how we're leveraging it at our organization. Tracy.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today. So the Planning Cloud comes as part of the Oracle EPM cloud solution, and it's a centralized planning and forecasting solution. There are pre-built content and modules that you can take advantage of to jumpstart your implementations, and Children's Colorado took advantage of the financials module. So you'll see kind of a glimpse of that pre-built framework, and you'll see a little bit how we even tweaked it to support some specific requirements that Children's Colorado had to help make it a more dynamic, user-driven forecasting process. Ultimately, the Planning Cloud really helps you to shorten your planning cycles and gives you a lot of flexibility depending on how you want to forecast and scenario model. There is a web component UI that is available to you, along with the support in Excel. So if you have your power users, they love Excel, they can continue to plan and forecast in Excel. There's a lot of pre-built features to really accelerate and add value into your forecasting process. Predictive planning capabilities, Bill will talk about that in just a little bit. Approvals and having a dynamic workflow. Underneath the covers, there's a really powerful calculation engine. It uses Essbase, which is a multidimensional database to help calculate quickly, roll up and aggregate your forecast, be able to run allocations, be able to calculate your driver-based forecasting to seed forecasts. Calculation possibilities are endless with the calculation engine in Essbase. And then it also provides really powerful reporting and analysis. So as soon as users submit in their budgets, you're immediately or near immediately be able to report and analyze at any different level within your organization. There's complete visibility and auditability capabilities, so you can see how the numbers are changing. Users have the ability to add in commentary. And you can really create a very user-friendly guided process and flow through the web and in Excel. There's dashboarding capabilities, lots of different nicely formatted reporting options, as well as ad hoc capabilities as well.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. I'll take it from here. So one of the major things that we do at Children's Hospital Colorado is we've moved fundamentally to beyond budgeting concepts, which that's been going on for several years, transforming how we look at what used to be a long budgeting process, planning process, and then tweaking all those budgets as we move forward and things continue to change. So the good news is, because we had this foundational change early, it's actually helping us quite a bit. So we've removed the terms plan and budget, and we really just continuously are forecasting. And then we leverage that most current forecast for the next 12 months to create targets to kind of for an annual targets and goals. But obviously we're always continuing to shift to dynamics that were happening within the environment. But more importantly now, obviously, things have changed dramatically. So what we do as part of our process is we definitely look at those actual trends and look for opportunities to continuously improve quarter over quarter. But we try to look at it more on an unbiased process. Because when we introduce bias, usually our forecasts we get too optimistic or pessimistic, depending on how you're thinking through it. And it really doesn't necessarily guide your business to actually what's happening there. So we did that, and I'll talk about some of the bias that we've unfortunately had to increase in our forecast, and right away we're seeing the impacts of that. Luckily, it's a positive impact, but I'll kind of talk about that in a second. We do have initiative planning as well, so we can kind of get an overall run rate for how our variable departments are working and operating. See how that's varying out, as well as our fixed departments. But then you can always layer in some initiatives that are happening, which obviously large organic growth like opening a new hospital, we wouldn't have the history for it. So we do have to project and put some assumptions kind of topside in there, and we can layer those things in to get a full picture of where we think things are heading to. But again, we look at more overall targets, so kind of look at KPIs and see where we should be operating, and then cast our forecast much more dynamically based on those key drivers. So each individual department has some key stats that we determine revenue off of, as well as expenses. And based on just a couple factors, kind of looking at run rates and changes in rates as well as volume, we can then project basically in a P&L very, very quickly. So that's our concepts there. Our forecasting solution, the change overall in the last many years that we've been doing this, was a 5-week process to simply a few days. And we saw that with really in March, as we got into a lot of the shutdown that we were was being imposed on us. Edward talked about that in his presentation, that our governor asked for us to pause on elective surgeries, elective cases, and really reduce volumes that could possibly be deferred while we prepared for kind of a worst case scenario in Colorado. So so we closed things down, and then we waited. But as we were waiting, the big question was like, well, what does this mean for us financially? So interesting enough, the psychology of all of this is that sometimes people in leadership too, and just habits, I guess, from a personal perspective, is we go for what we know really, really well, and we might forget about some of the tools that we have. And we just simply had to nudge people back to leveraging a lot of the technology that we have in place. And there's a couple examples of that where I think our CFO looked at was, quickly, like, we need to understand where we're going. So I'll jump into Excel, we'll kind of model out some things, and our director over planning and forecasting was like, there's still too many scenarios. We really need to jump in the tool and do the tool and make sure we're using that, which was obviously available, just making people comfortable that, I don't know if we go back to what we can control versus things that I need to take a step back and let the tool calculate. So very quickly, within just a matter of a few days, put in some assumptions and created some different scenarios that at least gave us possible scenarios of where we were heading financially very, very quickly. And it was very well received by the executive team that we could create, not only just talk to the overall macro assumptions, but also then the financial implications of those, and kind of work out basically 3 types of scenarios. And there's obviously many combinations out there, which is a struggle I think we all face as we move forward, is which combination of events are going to actually transpire over the next several months and then even beyond this year into next year. So again, the overall tool is it's an automated driver-based model. So once we load it, it does calculate and forecast things very, very quickly. Now, obviously, one of the things is understanding the assumption changes. So it's great when things are more predictable, and we do have that year over year, month over month seasonality, and it's very predictable. A lot of our drivers obviously were dramatically impacted as change rates fell quite a bit, obviously in March and April. So how do we deal with that? We start to introduce some bias, and we have to create some assumption changes. And then that's where judgment and feelings and things like that start to come into play. Like, how conservative do you want to be, and how do you want to calculate this out? So with all that too, we integrate to on-prem cubes, and we'll talk about our cubes here in a minute. But again, it just helps us not only model out certain assumptions, but then do some very quick reporting and analysis, and just test those assumptions and make sure it makes sense with our overall guidance. So again, with this model in particular, as Tracy talked through, we particularly just focus on the income statement and look at where we're going overall for margin prediction as well as overall income projection. We do an 18-month model, and every month now, I mean, originally we actually had a scope that was much more quarterly focused and said we really need to forecast the next 6 quarters. And luckily we had the foresight to say, well, quarters are nice, but what if we actually had to do this more monthly? Maybe we should really be thinking about this in 18 months, which will allow us to forecast much more frequently. And they said, yeah, but we really kind of do it quarterly. I said, yeah, but what if? So the what if is now, and again, it allowed us to load the previous month, recalculate, and reforecast 18 months in near real time. Obviously, you still have to do the analysis and do the adjustments, but you can choose where you want to go with certain pieces and let other things flow out. Again, certain parts of our business not truly impacted by coronavirus. Certainly surgical cases like Edward talked about, electives certainly down, but unfortunately heart conditions don't choose their time, and our NICU volume certainly, people continue to have babies, and we're here to support the care of new kids as they enter the world. And then obviously there's oncology services as well, which continue to, kids need care and service. So some things were impacted, but other things remained the same, and we can kind of see how things were happening. But overall, I would say, what we're seeing is the social distancing is leading to more health in kids. So while we had seasonal flu impact, which we typically see a large surge in our first quarter of every year. That was starting to come down. It was still there, and then social distancing, we feel, was obviously helpful to reduce the spread of flu as well as coronavirus. So with social distancing, we're seeing some declines there as well. So forecasting, again, let's go back to the model. Again, this is just a couple screenshots of our tool. We do calculate overall rates and then allow for some judgment to be put in there in terms of if you want to override the rate. So if you're seeing a certain growth rate of 60% and you want to make it 50%, you can simply key in that assumption. But what we typically do is document our assumptions around why would you change certain things, and did you have a good reason for it. Some things might be as simple as a new department's opened up, we don't have enough volume, or we're seeing obviously percentage growth that there was nothing before and now there is something, so we're seeing 100% growth. That's not going to happen obviously for the next month. So tamping that down, adjusting our drivers is certainly part of the process. And then we can not only look at volume, but then this is an example of rates. So we look at average hourly rates, how are those happening, and then adjust for market, merit, things like that as they're happening throughout the years and throughout each of the months. At the end of the day, we do get then a final all-stat P&L look that tells you financially as well as volumes, where they're heading and all the ratios associated with that. And then we sweep that out to a lot of our reporting tools out there so we can slice and dice it in even better ways. So the model works well, it works very quick, allows us to forecast things very quickly. Again, I talked about layering in, so we do have our base run rate assumptions, and then it allows us to, using a project dimension that we've created, to kind of say these are the projects or initiatives that are happening, and we can name those as we need to, and talk about, for example, opening a new hospital, and just layering in the P&L impact for that. Another thing we've also done, which just kind of highlights as part of healthcare where we can go deeper, is we can look at the overall drivers for each of the units, but sometimes we may want to go even deeper and dimensionalize that and try to tweak and have more decisions about what's driving that particular driver. So our physician visit model was an extension, so we went a little deeper on not just visits that were happening within a particular clinic, but overall, like what is multiple clinics looking like, what's our physician utilization look like, how well they're using their templates when they're scheduling, is there additional capacity, can we see more kids and help more kids. So this would obviously help us dimensionalize that out further and see if a specific doctor has capacity. So in order to do that, you kind of need to create like a sub-cube that would then fit into the overall planning process. And depending on your business, you could do this for anything. You could do this for surgeries, you could do it for physician visits like we did, or really any particular driver you want to go deeper on to see how things are trending overall. All right. Now, leveraging predictive, we have certainly done a lot looking at the predictive models and trying to test how well our run rates are, and had actually another team, data scientists from another team, come in and check our calcs versus other calcs that were out there. And we had really, really good results with our forecast in terms of how well we're predicting. Now, that said, that was based on pretty consistent run rates and seasonality. Now the question is, how do we work through this enormous dip that we've seen in volumes and not necessarily let that factor in that we're going to always see the next wave of coronavirus or whatever to happen in March and April and May, and see that drawdown. So how do we take that out of some of the predictive models, because you're doing lookbacks typically when you're doing the predictive, and making sure that those outliers are really detected. And we've heard a lot about some outlier detection, but what's interesting is typically we do see a decline coming out of March into April with just regular seasonality. Obviously this is more exaggerated, so we can't just say get rid of all the down, but how do you bring it back to, again, more predictive. So I know, Tracy, you had talked a little bit with Oracle about some of the tools and what they're thinking. Do you want to kind of describe what they've talked about?
Sure. So what's exciting for the prediction capabilities is right now it's a very user-driven feature. But what we're going to be able to do, kind of safe harbor in the near term, I think it'll happen this year, is something called auto prediction that will allow you to set up predictions to run automatically, and then you can save those in multiple scenarios. So a user doesn't have to kick it off. It's something that you can actually create and have, Oracle kind of run this predictive plan for you, and then you can compare that against your bottoms up options. Now, one of the questions that we've asked, how does the predictive nature account for all the anomalies that are happening? Because if it is using some Monte Carlo time scenario factors when it's coming up with these predictive plans. And again, we're still kind of delving into some of the details with them, but what they're saying is that the analytics, as long as you've got kind of the history to generate, it's going to understand that there's certain outliers that are occurring right now, and then accommodate that going forward. So anyway, it's an exciting feature. I think, kind of how we leverage it with some of the unexpectedness that we've been facing and some of the challenges we've been facing in the outliers that won't traditionally happen. They're working on the algorithms behind the scenes so that we can accommodate that, and or being able to kind of define the time periods that we want to use for the basis of these particular predictions.
Very good. Thanks, Tracy. So again, we're struggling with on our side is, again, same thing everybody is how do you deal with the event that happened and all that change that's taken place in our volumes? How do you take that out? How do you jump over it? And I'll show you a slide here coming up that kind of looks at, in particular, PTO and how PTO trends have gone in our organization. And we looked at an opportunity to obviously have some expense savings and increase PTO taking to make sure that, it's one of our levers for financial recovery. So more to come on that here in a second. I like to do is transition into the other technology that we use, like even probably we've expanded even further, is our Essbase cubes. And I'll just call it Essbase cubes on the fly, and I'll try to describe kind of how we've taken what was traditionally maybe a longer design cycle to say, hey, I need an Essbase cube to kind of do this too. And it might take several weeks or something to kind of form that out to, hey, we really just need to look at it this way tomorrow. So how could you create an Essbase cube by tomorrow or even later in the same day? So quick introduction by Tracy on what is Essbase.
Sure. So Essbase is a multidimensional database that has been around a really long time, and it is a very powerful way to store your data for fast reporting and analysis. There's a couple of different Essbase options underneath the covers, but ultimately, again, it gives you a cube of data, and that you can very quickly slice and dice and perform analytics on. You can create calculations within that cube. You can apply granular security so that if certain users should only see certain aspects of the cube, very easy and simple to do. So you can use Essbase from an enterprise-wide standpoint and rolling out to all of your organizational users, to very department-focused kind of data mart focused analytics. What's great is in the new versions of Essbase, we are able to create cubes very quickly from spreadsheets. And you don't really have to be an Essbase super admin to be able to create these cubes. There's also some new features as well. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll jump into some of the new ways that you can create cubes. There is a web user interface in the new cloud version. So you can create applications and create these cubes in the web. And then if we page down, you can also do the same thing in Excel. So there's a new Cube Designer add-in that gets added in whenever you install SmartView and you install Essbase to be able to create cubes and copy cubes and load data without having to take the time that we used to do with creating complicated rules files and those things. That the Cube Designer actually creates those objects for us. Here's just another example or screenshot of the cube designer. So again, it's really allowing us to create these cubes very quickly from Excel. So your design time, your time to build your cubes, you can really just kind of create these based off the data so that you can analyze the data, be able to quickly aggregate, create these different scenarios. There's a concept called an application workbook. So there are templates that are very easy to use that kind of gives you the structure to build the cubes. So again, no kind of technical programming, and really you don't even have to be a super Essbase expert to be able to create these.
Okay, so we're going to dive into a couple of samples of how we were able to leverage our existing cubes that we had, and in particular, my role as part of COVID response very quickly became more focused on our labor side. So labor, obviously, labor expense is, and I'm sure for a lot of the organizations on the call, is one of the most significant expenses we have on our P&L. So managing labor, productivity, as well as how we schedule people, how we staff people, how we pay people appropriately, and navigate through retention and all the options that were being considered regarding pay and how we protect our employees that are very, very valuable to our organization. So my other job, which is not just to do Essbase work and planning work, is to actually support our Chronos application. So for those that use Chronos, this is probably going to resonate pretty well. But Chronos is our timekeeping system. So it keeps track, obviously, of how people are working every day. But it also is our scheduling system. So it's how we staff our people on the different units. And one of the key challenges we had was kind of a dynamic where obviously our volumes were cut dramatically, but we wanted to retain people because we just didn't know. We obviously know we're going to recover from this. So how do we get through this in the most financially responsible way? And protect our people and as we move through this. So there's kind of a shift overall regarding, we reduced certain jobs and certain workloads that we typically would see, but then we also saw growth in other areas where we suddenly needed a lot more screeners at the door. We needed to staff mobile testing sites, things like that, where these are new jobs. So kind of moving people out of traditional, like what they do every day, and then rescheduling and restaffing them into new critical roles that we needed to help respond and manage PPE supplies, things like that. So created a whole bunch of new jobs, new roles within our organization. And again, we also had to make sure we scheduled all the people there. So we tweaked our Chrono system, but then also needed not only to see those transactions in there, but also like, what does this mean? How are we doing in not only paying people, but then also what's our projection for next day, next week, next couple weeks. So with that, we had created a Chronos Cube a while ago. It was mostly focused on what had happened actually, and then we'd never really come up with, we always had in our back pocket to say like, well, it would be interesting if we staged some of our scheduling data from Chronos in a cube. And that quickly became an imperative that we needed to see not only where people were scheduled for tomorrow, but then how we were doing with staffing overall. So quickly created a mock-up of bringing scheduling data into another cube. And then we had the brilliant idea of like, well, what if we blended our actuals with our schedule together to create a continuous line of what's happening yesterday compared to where we're going, and just get a continuous line. So that's why you'll see our name of our cube is Chronal. So it's both actuals as well as scheduling data blended together into a single data source. So using the add-in that we talked about earlier in Excel helped us really quickly make, well, you could do some LCM work or lifecycle management work within the cloud to copy our cubes over, create replicas of them, and then tweak them. But using both how quick it is to copy cubes and replicate databases and then modify them either on the cloud or within the SmartView toolkit saved us enormous amounts of time, as well as allowing us to flex and react to different lists of things. So one in particular, if you'll see, traditionally, if you were looking at it, you might say, all right, let's look at it by department, like who's the manager, the director, the VP. But then you'll notice there's some additional attributes that we could add on very, very quickly regarding like what's the COVID status of that particular department? Is that department impacted by slower volumes, or is it actually just completely closed because we reduce sites temporarily? And so what are those people doing compared to impacted sites? What's their overall, and then actually moving into some of the employee attribution. So were there some high-risk employees? Were there people that were actually moving to long-term baseline, so kind of repositioning people temporarily to other baseline needs? So quickly tagging those employees and then allowed us to do analytics like very, very rapidly. And again, I don't know if it was human nature or whatever, but we all very initially, we turned the curve very, very quickly with, for a couple days where people were like, no, I'll just do this in Excel. I'll just kind of keep it to myself. I'll try to model it. And sure enough, information can be shared quick enough or accurately enough. Different people had different sheets and we just couldn't keep the version straight at all. So my joining the team allowed us to centralize a lot of our data to get to a consistent source of accurate data for decision making. So and just very rapidly, not only could you get a single source of truth, but then also you could see that data in near real time, which helped tremendously in our response. This is another slide that we have. We built out particularly focused around peri-op. So this just shows you another way that you can extend the Essbase cubes to really model anything that you have out there. So think about your subledgers, think about other volumes such as peri-op, and then you can slice and dice and see, as you've got here, multiple ways to slice and dice, where you have by location, by day of the week. So you know, like, when are you peaking? Do you have more surgeries on Monday, Tuesday compared to Friday, which tends to taper off? And then if we do have higher volumes on Fridays, then how does that impact staffing for the weekend and things like that as kids come out and recover on other units? So just wanted to show you that example of, again, just different ways you can leverage the technology to slice and dice. It may not be part of your forecasting process per se, but you can, if you have these rich data sources, this can be ways that you can do analytics on all your volumes, and then just kind of test against your forecast assumptions, and then integrate those assumptions together into one overall model. This is another quick example of what it looks like when you use the add-in. So Chronal, when you just go through SmartView, it'll download a big Excel workbook with all your dimensions on it, and then you quickly can add and assign certain attributes just in there, and you press upload, and it re-uploads and puts it in. So it saves a ton of time for those that are more technical. You probably would have to wrestle with load rules and things like that to do modifications and tweak all that. With this workbook, you can I would probably recommend best practice would be, if you're going to add a dimension, just go ahead and add the dimension in the cloud. Then you have kind of a footprint, and when this comes out, everything's organized really, really well. And then you're simply just updating, adding rows to the Excel workbook, and you just push it back up, and it's all there. It takes care of the loading and any issues you have with kind of building each little piece, which you used to do in the past. Bit of news. I was just reflecting on this, and they'll probably impact the happy hour. So I'm actually 21 years this month using Essbase. So I guess I'm legal for the
Awesome.
happy hour coming up. So 21 years of Essbase. How about that? So, all right. So we're going to kind of pivot now into Oracle Analytics and some of the visualization. I'll show you a couple things, and we can open it up for questions.
So I kind of what it can be layered on top of these Essbase cubes, on top of your planning forecasting cubes, and or any other data sets. If you guys have data warehouses, data marts, other sources, what you need to be able to do is you need to have an interface and enabling technology to help kind of visualize and understand the data and take, columns and columns and rows and grids of numbers to make it something more meaningful. So this is where Oracle Analytics comes into play. And it allows you to have self-service exploration and kind of the new modern BI interface. So traditionally business intelligence has been a key administrator, developer creates a dashboard, a set of reports for me, and then I'm stuck with that confined view and layout of the data. But those days are gone. I mean, they're still available and there's still a use case for those. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But really what we want to do is allow folks to be able to self-service and be able to kind of analyze and see data in a graphical fashion to help understand patterns, trends, issues much more quickly. It also allows us to kind of quickly aggregate, summarize data because the volume of data, the explosion of data that we have available to us today has increased dramatically. So again, the idea is having kind of this analytics tool that, no tech skills required, users can do it, can be able to perform analysis, perform these analytics. This is also where Oracle is building in a lot of their machine learning, artificial intelligence capabilities and features. So eventually we won't even have to have an analyst be able to analyze the data. Oracle's going to do that for us and present the information to us. So there are features that are available today now where you can do some predicting and kind of training of models to see what predictive options are going to look like. Bill will talk about that in just a little bit. Also natural language capabilities, so being able to just ask questions, and again, gone are the days of SQL statements and having to understand SQL. We've got kind of this really click and drag experience to view the analytics. And again, it's more graphical, charts, formats, tiles, gauges, help us be able to understand the data and what's going on much more quickly. There is still the traditional component within Oracle Analytics. So there are some users who are click the button type users, right? And they're not really wanting to dive in and self-service. They're wanting, okay, please, provide me what are the kind of key metrics, key pieces of information that I need to know. So again, Oracle Analytics still continues to provide those capabilities as again, that's going to be needed for a certain population of your users to be able to consume information. These are usually reusable, repeatable presentations of data that you're going to do on a regular basis. Again, connecting to these Essbase cubes, our EPM cloud forecasting cubes, along with really any source that we may have for our organization.
All right, thanks, Tracy. So one example of how we use data visualization in our part of our journey, we're just starting to get into how to leverage data visualization more and more with our users. However, we do have it, it's delivered, it's part of our package. So in this case, what I'll show you is an example of how we were predicting PTO usage. So one of the impacts, which we probably all are feeling, was there's usually a very predictable pattern of how people take PTO. And as long as that happens, no issue. It's very predictable to how it impacts your expenses and whatnot. But now with once it hit in March, there was obviously a huge reduction in cancellations of PTO as people didn't take spring break, started holding on, and there really wasn't where to go. So PTO taking was disrupted. So we saw large dips in that, which we started to accrue more and more PTO, but nobody was taking PTO. So the balance started to get out of whack. So one of our cost savings initiatives was to, push, more of a mandatory PTO out for certain parts of our population to kind of cover that gap that we saw very, very quickly. So data visualization, though, as a tool, very easy to use. What we typically would do is we would have our data within Essbase, and we might do a quick smart view to kind of stage the data. In this case, we had all this data regarding the types of You can see on the left different, so managers versus tech and specs, nurses, different cuts of what percentage of PTO did they take compared to their normal FTE hours to get to a percentage, and see how that trended over time. And to visualize really quickly, you just simply point to that spreadsheet, upload it, and then run quick graphs like this. So you simply drag and drop. This took about maybe 5 minutes or less, just kind of uploading it, and then it interpreted the file and gave me the trends. So what you'll see here, which probably is very consistent with other organizations, is these consistent spikes. So we look back 3 years, 4 years, and you can kind of see these consistent drags, which the highest peaks are around Christmas, New Year's. Take a step back, you can see Thanksgiving, and then you can see the 3 caps here, which is the start of summer, the middle of summer, and the end of summer. So each of the holidays, so Memorial Day, 4th of July, and then Labor Day. And so what we were predicting, and we saw it, was a large decline in PTO taking between March, April, and May, and then enforcing more of a mandatory PTO policy through July 4th, and we are getting good results from that, and then trying to figure out how we're going to manage the rest of the year regarding PTO taking. But again, staged it, saw the patterns, and interesting patterns, and you can even see some repeatable little check boxes or check points within the graphs that are interesting. But overall, you can put then a trend line in and say, yep, 10% is typically your target, which we always knew and assumed, but this kind of shows you the data to support where we should be. And then you can do a quick predict to kind of show how things potentially would be panning out if we had rolled it back. So one thing I did was, if you'll see at the top, you can do a period in. So I said, let's go back to maybe where the start of news coming out that this is going to be really, really serious. So back to like March 7th, the end of our pay period, and then allow it to project out what typically would happen. And you can see the predictor there. One thing we struggle with, just to be honest with, is sometimes we have, we call it small data, not big data issues. Because if you use these predictors with smaller sets of data, it may not have enough variation to understand all those patterns that it would with a very rich, bigger data set. So sometimes the predictor doesn't, it gives you more of an average overall versus just kind of really showing some of those seasonal curves. So that's just kind of a watch out or a learning, and we're kind of on our journey to get more into some of those bigger, richer data sets to really predict out some of those patterns. So just wanted to show you that as a use case. Again, it's delivered with the Oracle Analytics Cloud, and we're just starting to leverage the capabilities. There's even more and more coming out with each release. One thing we did talk about too, which Tracy touched on, is we do have a small footprint of OBI that we use pretty consistently to show our financial results month over month. So this is example of our May year-to-date results, and we put some KPIs at the top and put some trending. And what's nice here too is it allows us to put some narrative into the results, which you can see in that lower left corner, and we put some definitions at the bottom. So very quickly we can see what's happening with these 7 KPIs for our business. Obviously, variance to goal is pretty red across the board because these goals were set at the beginning of the year. We're not meeting our goals, but how are we going to get back on track to something that's much more financially reasonable as we move forward? So just wanted to highlight that. That's another way that we do it. And then the forecast, once we're done, also integrates into this. So everything becomes a single source of truth as we know it. As we continue to evolve with more and more information, and the information obviously continues to change, we can reforecast, see our models, and make the best assumptions possible as we move forward. So with that, that's our kind of our closing statements. And again, I went through the 3 tools that we've been using. Certainly we'll talk about them more in the panel discussion later today if you're going to join us for that. But again, we use forecasting. It's a very, very